Picture this. You're standing in a crowded room filled with some of the most dangerous men in America, cigars burning, whiskey flowing, and tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Someone just cracked a joke about your dead brother, your little brother, who you couldn't save. What do? Most people would explode. They'd throw punches, scream, or at least storm out. But Dean Martin, he did something that left everyone in that room absolutely stunned. His response wasn't just unexpected, it was a masterclass in control that revealed something deeper about who he really was. This is the story of how one of Hollywood's smoothest entertainers faced one of the ugliest moments of his life, and why what happened next still matters today. Before we dive into that shocking moment, you need to understand who Dean Martin actually was, because he wasn't just some crooner in a tuxedo. Born Dino Paul Corsetti in Steubenville, Ohio, Dean grew up in a world most of us can barely imagine. His parents were Italian immigrants who barely spoke English. Young Dino worked as a bootlegger, a card dealer, and even a boxer before he ever stepped on stage. This wasn't some privileged kid playing dress-up in Hollywood. This was a street-smart survivor who clawed his way up from nothing. By the time the 1950s and 60s rolled around, Dean had transformed himself into something America had never quite seen before. He was effortlessly cool before cool was even a thing. Frank Sinatra had swagger, but Dean, he had something else entirely. He made everything look easy, the singing, the acting, the comedy. He'd walk on stage with a whiskey glass, usually filled with apple juice, but nobody knew that, crack a few jokes, sing a ballad that would make grown men cry, and stroll off like it was just another Tuesday. People loved him because he never seemed to try too hard. In an era of buttoned-up perfection, Dean was the guy who looked like he'd just rolled out of bed and accidentally became a superstar. But here's what most people didn't see. Underneath that relaxed persona was someone who'd experienced real loss, real pain, the kind that shapes you forever. Dean had a younger brother named Bill. While Dean was off conquering Hollywood, Bill stayed closer to their Ohio roots, living a quieter life away from the spotlight. The details of Bill's death aren't what matter most here. What matters is understanding what it meant to Dean. In Italian families, especially immigrant families of that era, brotherhood wasn't just biology. It was sacred. You protected your own. You carried your family name with honor. When you lost a brother, you lost a piece of yourself. Dean rarely spoke about Bill publicly. That wasn't his style. While other celebrities might have shared their grief with the world, Dean kept it locked away behind that charming smile and those half-closed eyes. But those who knew him well could see it, a shadow that passed across his face when someone mentioned family, a distance that crept into his eyes. But this wasn't just sadness. This was survivor's guilt mixed with the particular pain of success, that gnawing feeling that maybe if he'd been there more, been less focused on his career, been a better brother, things might have been different. He carried that weight quietly, professionally. The show always went on. Dean would be on stage at the Sands in Las Vegas, making thousands of people laugh until their sides hurt, and then he'd go back to his dressing room and sit in silence, alone with thoughts he'd never share. Now, to understand how Dean ended up in a room with mobsters in the first place, you need to understand the world he operated in. The Rat Pack, Dean, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop weren't just entertainers. They were a cultural phenomenon that existed at a very specific intersection of Hollywood glamour and Las Vegas excess. And in Las Vegas during the 1960s, there was no separating entertainment from organized crime. This wasn't like today, where casinos are run by corporations and everything's sanitized for tourists. Back then, Vegas was literally built and controlled by mob families. The Flamingo, the Sands, the Desert Inn, these weren't just hotels, they were the crown jewels of criminal enterprises. The guys who ran these places weren't businessmen in suits having board meetings. They were men who'd built their empires through violence, intimidation, and a code of conduct most of us couldn't begin to understand. These were people who'd ordered hits over dinner, who'd made men disappear for disrespecting them, who viewed the world through a lens of power and loyalty that had no room for weakness. And yet they loved Dean Martin. They loved all the Rat Pack, really, but Dean especially. Why? Because in many ways, Dean spoke their language. He understood respect. He understood loyalty. He knew when to talk and when to keep his mouth shut. His working-class immigrant background gave him credibility that other Hollywood stars didn't have. But this created a complicated situation. Dean wasn't part of their world. Not really. He was an entertainer, an artist, someone who'd chosen a different path, but he moved through their circles, he performed at their venues, he attended their parties, he shook their hands and laughed at their jokes. It was a delicate balance, and Dean walked it better than almost anyone. So we arrive at that night, the night that would test everything Dean Martin was made of. The exact details have been told different ways over the years, as these stories tend to be, but the core truth remains consistent. Dean was at a gathering, likely at one of the Vegas casinos or perhaps a private club. The room was filled with connected guys, made men, as they'd say, people who commanded respect through fear. The atmosphere was probably what you'd expect, loud, boozy, filled with that particular brand of masculine bravado that comes from men who've never been told no, jokes flying, stories being told, everyone trying to one-up each other. And then, someone accounts vary on exactly who, but multiple sources suggest it was someone with significant mob connections, made a joke about Bill Martin, about Dean's dead brother. Maybe the guy didn't know about the relationship, maybe he'd had too much to drink, maybe he was testing Dean, seeing if the smooth Hollywood star would crack under pressure, or maybe he was just cruel, flexing his power by seeing how far he could push someone. The room went quiet. Not completely silent, but you know that shift that happens when something crosses a line, when everyone suddenly becomes aware that something significant is happening. That's what witnesses described. All eyes turned to Dean. Think about the situation he was in. This wasn't some random guy at a bar. This was someone dangerous, someone connected, someone who could make your life very difficult if you responded the wrong way, someone who might view a strong reaction as disrespect, which in that world was a problem. But it also wasn't just anyone making a joke about nothing. This was about his dead brother, his family, the most sacred thing in his world. Dean had maybe 3 seconds to decide how to respond. 3 seconds that would define him. Here's what Dean Martin did. He looked at the guy who made the joke, really looked at him, not with anger, not with hurt, but with something else entirely. And then he smiled. Not a big smile, not a fake smile, just that classic Dean Martin half smile that had charmed millions. And he said, calmly and clearly, "That's my brother you're talking about." That's it. No yelling, no threats, no storming out, just a simple statement of fact, delivered with absolute conviction and zero aggression. Then he paused. Just a beat, and he continued talking as if nothing had happened. He didn't demand an apology. He didn't escalate. He didn't make it a bigger deal than it needed to be. But everyone in that room understood exactly what had just happened. Dean had drawn a line without raising his voice. He'd defended his brother's memory without starting a war. He'd shown strength without showing violence. He'd claimed his dignity without demanding submission from anyone else. The guy who made the joke, according to witnesses, he immediately backed off. There were no further comments about Bill Martin that night or any other night. The message had been received, loud and clear. Now you might be thinking, okay, he kept his cool, so what? That's what adults do. But you're missing the deeper lesson here, one that applies to every single one of us, whether we're dealing with mob bosses or just difficult people in our everyday lives. Dean Martin understood something that most people never learn. Real power isn't loud. Real strength doesn't need to prove itself. Real respect is earned through control, not chaos. Think about how most people would have handled that situation. They would have either, option 1, exploded, shouted, gotten in the guy's face, maybe thrown a punch. This feels powerful in the moment, but it's actually weakness disguised as strength. It's letting someone else control your emotions, letting them turn you into something you're not. Option 2, stayed silent, swallowed the insult, laughed along, pretended it didn't hurt. This seems like taking the high road, but it's actually abandoning yourself. It's teaching people that they can disrespect what you hold sacred and face no consequences. Dean did neither. He found that incredibly rare third option. Acknowledge the violation, state your boundary, and refuse to be moved from your center. That's my brother you're talking about. 7 words. No more, no less. Just enough to make the point without making it a war. Let's dig deeper into why this worked, because there's actual psychology at play here that you can use in your own life. When someone insults or disrespects you, they're actually doing 2 things. First, they're attacking whatever they're saying, in this case, Dean's brother. But second, and more importantly, they're testing you. They're seeing if they can knock you off balance, if they can control your emotional state, if they can make you small. Most people fail this test in one of the 2 ways I mentioned. They either explode or they collapse. Either response gives the attacker exactly what they want, proof that they have power over you. Dean's response was genius because it refused to play that game entirely. He didn't give the guy the satisfaction of seeing him lose control, but he also didn't give him the satisfaction of getting away with it. By staying calm, Dean actually increased the social pressure on the other guy. Think about it. When someone insults you and you freak out, everyone focuses on your reaction. You become the problem. But when someone insults you and you respond with calm dignity, everyone focuses on their action. They become the problem. Dean made the joke teller look small without saying he was small. He made him look cruel without calling him cruel. He made him look weak without challenging his strength. That's a level of social intelligence that most people never develop. So what does this mean for you? Because unless you're hanging out with mob bosses, and if you are, maybe reconsider your life choices, you might think this doesn't apply. You face these moments all the time, just in different forms. The colleague who makes a cutting remark about your work in a meeting. The family member who brings up your past failures at dinner. The friend who crosses a line with a joke that goes too far. The internet troll who attacks something you care about. In every single one of these moments, you have the same choice Dean had: explode, collapse, or draw a line with dignity. Here's how to do it. First, pause. That's the most important part. Dean didn't react immediately. He took a moment. In that moment, you create space between the stimulus and your response. That space is where your power lives. Second, state the truth simply. You don't need to explain, justify, or elaborate. That's not okay. I don't appreciate that. We're not doing this. Short, clear, non-negotiable. Third, move forward. Don't camp out in the conflict. Don't make it bigger than it needs to be. State your boundary and move on. This shows that you're not controlled by the situation. You're just managing it. The goal isn't to destroy the other person. It isn't to win an argument. It's to maintain your dignity and make clear what is and isn't acceptable in your world. Here's something else worth understanding. Dean Martin's response that night wasn't something he decided in the moment. It was the result of who he'd become over years of experience. Remember, this was a guy who'd grown up poor, who'd worked illegal jobs, who'd fought as a boxer, who'd scraped and clawed his way to success. He'd seen violence. He'd seen men try to intimidate and control each other. He'd probably been on both sides of disrespect. But somewhere along the way, Dean had learned that the truly powerful move is the one nobody expects. In a world where everyone's trying to prove how tough they are, the guy who doesn't need to prove anything stands out. This is why Dean's coolness wasn't an act. It was genuine. He really didn't need external validation. He really had done the internal work to know who he was and what mattered to him. His brother's memory mattered. His own dignity mattered. Some random guy's opinion, that didn't matter at all. This is the kind of confidence that can't be faked. People can smell fake confidence from a mile away, but real, deep-seated self-assurance, that's magnetic. That's why Dean Martin could walk into any room from Hollywood sets to mob-controlled casinos and command respect without demanding it. Here's what nobody talks about. That moment didn't just affect that one night. It rippled outward in ways both big and small. After that night, Dean's reputation in certain circles probably went up, not down. Why? Because he'd shown he could be pushed and wouldn't break. He'd shown he had lines that couldn't be crossed. In the world he moved through, that mattered. People knew they could work with him, joke with him, even challenge him, but there were boundaries, and he'd enforce them with calm certainty. But more than that, think about everyone else who was in that room. They all saw how Dean handled it. Some of them probably faced similar situations later and remembered the guy who drew a line without drawing blood. Maybe they used his approach. Maybe they learned from his example. This is how culture changes, not through grand speeches or dramatic gestures, but through individuals who refuse to participate in degradation, through people who show there's another way to be strong. In today's world, we've lost a lot of this nuance. Everything is immediate, everything is public, everything is amplified. Someone disrespects you online, the mob tells you to destroy them, to screenshot and shame them, to go to war. Someone crosses a line in person. Your friends tell you to make a scene, to ensure everyone knows you won't tolerate it. But what Dean understood, what our current culture has forgotten, is that you can defend yourself without destroying the space around you. You can maintain boundaries without burning bridges. You can be strong without being violent, even in your language. This doesn't mean being weak. It doesn't mean accepting disrespect. It means being so secure in yourself that you don't need external validation of your response. It means understanding that your dignity isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you carry yourself when others treat you poorly. Let me leave you with this. Dean Martin's brother, Bill, never became famous. He never performed on stage, never had his name in lights, never had thousands of people cheer for him. But in that moment, when that mobster made a tasteless joke, Bill mattered more than anything else in the world to one of the biggest stars in America. And Dean made sure everyone knew it. Not with violence, not with drama, just with simple, unshakable conviction. That's the real story here. It's not about mob bosses or Hollywood glamour or the good old days. It's about knowing what matters to you and standing for it, calmly, clearly, and without apology. It's about understanding that the person who stays centered in chaos is the person who actually controls the room. It's about recognizing that your response to disrespect says more about you than the disrespect itself ever could. The next time someone crosses a line with you, whether it's huge or small, remember Dean Martin in that room full of dangerous men. Remember that pause, that calm statement, that refusal to be moved from his center, and ask yourself, what would strength actually look like here? Not what would feel satisfying in the moment, not what would look good to others, but what would be true to who you actually are. Because that's the question Dean asked himself that night. And his answer shocked everyone in the room. But more importantly, it kept him whole. It kept him Dean Martin, the guy who could sing a love song 1 minute and face down a mobster the next, all without breaking a sweat. That's real power. That's real strength. And it's available to every single one of us, in every single moment where life tests who we really are. The story of Dean Martin and that terrible joke about his brother isn't just Hollywood legend. It's a blueprint for how to navigate a world that will constantly test your boundaries. You'll face your version of that mobster, maybe tomorrow, maybe today. Someone will say something that cuts deep, that crosses a line, that disrespects what you hold sacred. And in that moment, you'll have a choice. You can explode and prove that they control you. You can stay silent and prove that you don't value yourself. Or you can channel Dean Martin, pause, state your truth, and move forward with unshakable dignity. The world needs more of that third option right now. It needs more people who are strong enough to be calm, secure enough to be clear, and grounded enough to stand for what matters without demolishing everything around them. Be that person. Be the one who stays centered when chaos erupts. Be the one who draws lines without drawing blood. Because at the end of the day, that's what Dean Martin taught us. Real cool isn't about looking smooth on the outside. It's about being unshakable on the inside. And that's something worth remembering, whether you're facing a mob boss or just making it through another difficult day in a complicated world.